Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to once again be joined by the great Steve Jablonsky. On today's episode, we will focus on his new score, Red Notice, and of course, his collaboration with director Rawson Marshall Thurber. It is my pleasure to once again welcome Mr. Steve Jablonsky.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
Steve, of course, I would like to talk about Red Notice, which is like the biggest Netflix film or the film which has had the biggest launch in Netflix
Yeah,
history. At least that's
crazy.
what I've been told, and
Me too.
it's just unbelievable. Steve, when you worked with Rawson Thurber for the very first time, which I think was Skyscraper, not too
hmm
long ago, which also starred Dwayne Johnson, of course. Steve, I would like to talk about the process of getting to know a filmmaker, getting to know a director, and learning about their intentions and their
hmm
sensibilities as a filmmaker. What can you tell me about that? Because oftentimes, when you meet somebody for the very first time, you obviously don't know them well. You know them by reputation. And how do you handle that? How did you meet Rawson? How did you start your collaboration?
Great question. I don't want to put a percentage on it, but it's one of the biggest parts of this job, I think, is to learn the director or producers or whoever your main contact is. It's typically the director, and to learn how they communicate and what they mean by certain things. With Rawson, I was pretty fortunate that I saw very quickly, even though he's very self-deprecating, he always says, I don't know anything about music. A lot of directors say that, but and I say, that's fine. You don't have to tell me what notes to hit as long as just tell me what feelings you want.
Yeah.
And they're all very good at telling you that. That's the story is where their mind is set. And that's what I want from them. And that's what I wanted from Rawson. But I can't quite remember how I met him. My name just came up as a possible composer for this,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Oh yeah, I guess I like his music." And something just popped in my head. I have to thank Teddy Shapiro, who is fantastic composer and
Mm-hmm.
a friend of mine. And I learned much later that because he had done some of Rawson's films
Yes.
prior to me working with Rawson, and my name came up. And apparently Teddy said, "Oh, Steve would be great for this. He's got the perfect sound." And you know, I mean, what an amazing guy! What's it, a fellow composer to say, "How about you hire him?" Because he's, you know, it's just, that was because we share the same agent, and I heard that through my
Mm-hmm.
agent. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Just what a lovely man Teddy is
Yeah.
to do that kind of thing. But so that possibly that helped, and then I met with Rawson and read the script, and we talked, and I could tell Rawson's very much wanted to see what I had to say about the script, which is, he's casting basically, and I guess he liked what I had to say, and
Mm.
obviously, and then he hired me, and we started that process of me figuring out what sounds he likes, even the most basic thing. Does he like synthesized sounds, or does he
Mm-hmm.
not like them? Does
Mm-hmm.
he, and it takes time, but over time you learn, oh, I've used that particular sound 3 times, and every time he has not liked that section. So
Okay.
it's probably that sound, even if he doesn't specifically say, I don't like that sound. You just kind of find your way with a new director. And
Yes.
but yeah, I think I've gradually kind of figured out what he likes and doesn't like, and as long as you're really helping him tell the story, which is most directors, they just want to support
Yes.
happening. And so yeah, but I felt like a pretty natural process with
Yeah.
Rawson.
Right.
He's super kind, and he's available anytime. Any questions I have, we text a lot. I'll just say, hey, this scene, did you mean this, or do you want to feel this or that? And he'll
Yes.
get back to me. And it's a quick way of getting feedback without having to have a full-on meeting, which he's very busy and doesn't necessarily have time to devote an hour to come see me.
Yes, great. And of course, it's also about trial and error. You try to figure out something which you think may work, and then ultimately the producer or director may tell you, well, it's not quite what we are looking for. Please just try again. And have you ever encountered a scenario in which you realized, oh, maybe I made a tiny mistake and I should not do that again? Do you feel like somebody like Rawson really communicates what was wrong, or do they kind of beat around the bush? How is that with Rawson?
He's very clear if he's not. What I found with directors, and I can relate, because if you can imagine yourself sitting in a meeting and somebody plays your piece of music and you're supposed to analyze it on the spot and know if you like it or not and have comments on it, that's hard for anyone to go, I think it's good, but can I hear it 20 more times? So a lot of times Rawson were like, yeah, it's good, let me live with it. And over the course of him, I could say this: one good sign is if he goes, we'll put it in the cut, we'll put it in the Avid, and we'll live with it for a while. That means it's good enough to him that it's going to go in the cut, so he can watch it. If he says, if it's not at that stage yet, then I have more work to be done. But I always kind of know with him if he's feeling it or not.
Yes.
And sometimes it will go in the cut, and over time he'll go, that's actually not feeling right. Can you try a different approach completely? And I'm like, yeah, okay. It's a learning process for him as much as me deciding if he likes these cues. I don't envy directors having to make these. They basically make choices all day after they've, or even during shooting and after shooting. They're just deciding on, is that hat that Dwayne Johnson is wearing, is that the right hat or whatever. So I try to be as accommodating as I can to, just constantly trying to read him and get a vibe. And also the film editors are a big ally to composers, because they have that kind of the most direct contact. They're sitting with directors a lot, and maybe so I try to befriend them and have a good line of communication, so they can say, hey, Rawson made this comment today about this cue that we thought was okay, but there's a bit he's not really feeling anymore. I'm like, okay, I'll look at it.
Okay, great.
So it's just a circle of communication.
Great. And communication is so essential and very important, and you have to have a good rapport, I believe, to really make it through the finish line and to really sink your teeth into a project. And did you have a marching order on Red Notice, as in this is really what we should go for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it was it was a challenge, actually, because when I first read the script, I told him it felt like kind of an old school action adventure movie and we should treat it as such. And I threw out some ideas and he said, yeah, perfect. And I think that's why he hired me. He liked the plan. So we started down that path. And at some point, I'm not sure exactly who or why or how it happened, but it happens, where they thought, I wonder if we're treating this too seriously. There's a lot of comedy. Maybe we should lean a bit more into the comedy. So I started getting comments about cues maybe being too serious or too dark, and can we lighten them up and play the comedy a bit more? So we went a bit down that road, and then eventually we kind of came back the other way. And we ended up in the middle somewhere, but it was a finding ground. And Rawson and the editors, Mike and Julian, were great guys as well. They would tell me constantly, look, it's not you, we're trying to find the tone of this film and you're helping us, but seeing this cue with a little bit of a darker tone, or seeing this scene with a little bit of a darker tone cue, helped us realize that that's not right. So we're going to make some changes. It should be more comedic, and you make the cue more comedic. There was a lot of that back and forth on Red Notice, because it's the basic story is like kind of an adventure thing, but every scene is comedy in it somewhere. I think a good example is Gal Gadot's character.
Mm-hmm.
I never know if I'm saying that right, but initially, because she's such a flamboyant, kind of flashy character, and
Yes.
she plays it really well. I wrote her a kind of a flashy, flamboyant theme on solo violin, sort of over the top,
Mm-hmm.
and Rawson liked it. But then over time, he started not liking it so much, and I realized it's because we all realized together that that music was possibly going to make the audience take her less seriously, was the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's kind of a cartoony character. She wasn't a real threat to the other guys. And he wanted us to feel like she's a bit more mysterious and a threat. So we took out the violin, made it more mysterious. And there's still humor in there, but
Yes.
her character in particular was one that kind of went a little bit all over the place until we found what we wanted to do with it. But yeah, it was a process for sure.
What struck me about this film, Steve, is that it's not necessarily over the top. I mean, it is action oriented at times. It does have comedy. It does have this kind of espionage, kind of to an extent, old, quote unquote, old school vibe, which I loved. So there is no abundance of action, even though, of course, it can become pretty intense. But I think finding the right balance was also difficult. And how did you crack one of the main themes, which I think is very catchy and which is also present when Ryan Reynolds returns to his home, and then of course Dwayne Johnson's waiting for him, and then they bust him eventually. The da 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 da, and so that's a very catchy tune. So the score is theme oriented.
That was you hit on something that was important to Rawson from the beginning, and that's one thing I said to him when I read the script. I said, I think we should have some themes in this because it seems like it's that type of movie. And he's like, yes, let's do that. So I wrote. That's one of the first pieces I wrote. Was that track called Red Notice on the soundtrack?
Yeah,
but initially I called it
track 2 on the album, I think.
Yeah. I called it Booth initially because it was mainly aimed at Ryan Reynolds' character, but it sort of became a main theme for the film. But I wrote that, and I remember Rawson going, yeah, that's great. It sounds really good. I don't know if it's right for this movie, but I do like it a lot. That was one that he had to live with. And was it too fun? Was it not action adventure enough? Was it this and was it that? And as I started putting it into the movie in different ways, he started to like it more and more. Now he says it's like the greatest thing. But again, it takes him time to begin associating this track with his film and his story, and is it working? And he liked that we were using it a lot, to the point that you might actually, as you said, you might recognize it throughout the film, as opposed to the score being more of a kind of just a bed of pulses, and which works great in some films, but this one he wanted it a bit more out front, I guess, the themes. So that was one that we decided, that he liked that one enough, so we were going to use that. And you can hit it in short little bursts, and it seems to be effective. So he liked that approach.
Was there any specific scene in the film which you found especially attractive, something that you based your initial ideas on? Any standout scene that kind of really helped you to get your creative juices flowing?
Well, I started I started while he was shooting, so I didn't have a ton of stuff to look at, but I did see storyboards. And this is a whole nother conversation, but the pandemic changed the course of a lot of scenes because they just were no longer feasible to film under those conditions. But the way the film opened, at least in the original script, was similar, but it was more out in the streets of Italy, and and Ryan Reynolds was riding a moped through restaurants, and it was more of an outdoor chase as opposed to an indoor chase.
Okay.
So I had storyboards and animatics that kind of mocked up the scene, and it just seemed like big fun. Like Dwayne was super serious, but Ryan was having sort of fun with it, just toying with him. So I thought instead of doing a big, just kind of car chase scene, or car chase cue like I would normally do in a more serious film, I thought let's have a little fun with it. That was part of what got me going on the Red Notice track, the theme that you can play it big and fast and bombastic, but it's always kind of fun. So that's, I guess, helped me with the scene. But yeah, when I first wrote that track, I didn't have a lot of the film because they were still shooting it.
COVID has been very taxing, and of course it affects many people professionally, also mentally, and it also has had a huge impact on the filmmaking business. Releases were rescheduled and pushed back, so it allowed the composer to have more leeway, more freedom, more time, and also during the editing process. How did you experience that in general?
Yeah, time is always nice, I have to say, but I think in this case it was, and I feel it's safe to say Rawson would agree, that it was more of a curse only because it happened, I think, roughly halfway through shooting. So they just had to stop shooting. And once we realized what was going on, they realized a lot of the scenes that they had not shot yet, they couldn't shoot because there were just too many people around, basically. That was impossible. Yeah. So Rawson, I mean, I've had conversations with him about just how difficult it was to finish this film under these conditions. He had to rewrite many scenes. They had to have stand-ins constantly for the main actors, and they couldn't have extras. They had to digitally put extras in. I'm blown away by it when I see the movie now, because I know how they filmed a lot of these scenes, and it looks like there's people there, but there definitely were not people there when they filmed it. And it was just so taxing on Rawson personally. Me, I just, all I had to do was wait for them to send me scenes. So it wasn't, for me, I don't feel like I have anything to complain about, but Rawson and the actors and the producers and anyone on set, it was really apparently very complicated to make it work. The only complication for us, I guess, was the recording of it, because we had planned to record it. Rawson loves Abbey Road. That's where we recorded Skyscraper. Mm-hmm. He just loves the place, loves the atmosphere, as we all do. It's an amazing place.
It's great. Yeah.
Have you been there?
Yes. I've been at Abbey Road with Harry Gregson Williams.
Oh,
yes.
Oh my God, I could go on about Harry, but but yeah, that's where we were gonna go. But then once we got to the point of recording, we realized there was still some amount, 2 or 3 weeks, where once you land in the UK, you couldn't leave a room for 2 weeks or something. It was a quarantine period, and neither of us could afford that time. So he was very not upset. He was disappointed. He understood, though. So we moved it to Los Angeles so that we could just drive to the studio. We wouldn't have to quarantine for 2 weeks. And and then the recording, I'm sure you've talked to many composers about this. There were literally COVID officers, they called them, that would be there to make sure the players always had their mask on. We all had our masks on. Every player was 6 feet minimum apart, and so we could only fit so many players. It's all stuff that we worked out, and at the end of the day, it wasn't, a lot of people suffered way worse than me having to wear a mask and have less players, but it was a little bit of a logistical thing to get used to, but if it helped people not get this thing, then we were fine with it. But I think it worked out okay in the end.
Great. And thank you, Steve, for elaborating on that also.
Sure.
Of course, the interaction is also hugely important. And of course, I know many composers who spend time in the editing room,
Hmm.
and you kind of try to work out, okay, where do I want the music to start? Where should it stop? Of course, or
Yeah.
let's say, well, no, we need to recut the whole picture, and so personal interaction, of course, is so important. And of
Hmm.
course, now during the COVID, you had to rely on many Zoom calls, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I think depending on how you are wired as a person, I think it can either make or break a conversation, if you will,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, that was a tricky part. I because Red Notice was like right in the heart of the
mhm.
pandemic.
Yes.
Once they were allowed to kind of come back into the cutting room, I remember it was literally just the two editors were allowed in the building. Nobody else was there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so everything, and they were trying all these new software programs to allow us to, because Zoom isn't, it's great for this, what we're doing, but it's
Mhm.
not great for like them showing me, good high quality picture out of their Avid, out of their editing computer. So we were trying all these other softwares
Yeah.
that were kind of new at the time, I guess. Things were coming out or being adapted for this situation. And there was always bugs where the
Oh.
picture would freeze or that something would delay. And I remember, Rawson going, just shaking his head several times, going, "This is just not fun." Trying to do it there, but there was one day where finally I remember it because Rawson was so excited, where I was allowed. It was me, Rawson, the two editors, and our music editor Ron. It was like the first time they allowed 5 people in the building,
Okay.
but we all went in, and hopefully this is not, hopefully they did allow us. I don't know, maybe Netflix is going to hear this and go, "What? You were at the cutting room?" But it felt all sneaky. We were in there and we got together. That was literally the first time we had sat in a room and talked about the movie. And we're like, it's such a different thing than
Yeah.
everybody being on their laptop or whatever. So that was, I felt like the real start of of us actually discussing the movie, starting at the beginning, watching it through. I had written a bunch at that point, and I could just look at Rawson as he's listening because he's sitting right next to me, and I could get feedback. And so yeah, it was a very extended process, but I
Yeah.
once we got to that point, I feel like we were in much better shape.
Needless to say, at least for me, the theater experience is still so important.
Yeah.
And I feel that the whole pandemic has given even more power to streaming services. Of course, Amazon,
Hmm.
Netflix, and Apple TV, and Disney
Yeah.
Plus, and so I think it should not be neglected or overlooked how important going to the theater still is.
Hmm.
Also, in terms
Yeah.
of personal interaction or having or let's say going out with friends. And of course, you can also do that at home. You can have several people over and just cook something and watch a movie. But it's also very important to me to
Yep.
try to meet up with other people and have a different environment and surroundings. So that's very important. But have you, in terms of feedback from friends, colleagues,
Hmm.
acquaintances, do you get more feedback in terms of films and your own score when it concerns a theater release versus a Netflix release?
Right. That's a great question. Because this was an eye opener for me of how powerful Netflix is. When it came out, I got exponentially more just messages from people I went to high school with. There was a whole thing on Facebook of my high school buddies
Okay.
going, "Hey, Steve did Red Notice," because it was like this, it's an event, that
Okay.
everybody uses Netflix.
Yeah.
Everybody sees Red Notice pop up on
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
night that it debuts. Everybody watches it because people are looking for things to watch. And they all see my name. They go, "Oh my God, what is, it?" I, not even just people from high school, but the
Hmm.
amount of people who watched Red Notice that weekend was mind blowing to me. And I know if it was in the theater, that would not have happened. I just know that not all of those people were going to go out that weekend, for forgetting the pandemic. If that even if that wasn't the case,
Yeah.
I don't think that many people would have gone to see it that weekend and then gotten that excited. I don't know. I was just very shocked about how many people, just the sheer number of people who. So I did
Yeah.
definitely see the
Okay.
impact of streaming. And I agree
Yes.
with you, though. I grew up
Yeah.
going to theaters every weekend. Every weekend, my friends and I would go see whatever
Mhm.
movie was out.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
how I started loving movies. I feel like watching it at home, I'm like anyone else. You pause it, you go do something, and maybe you get a phone
Yes.
call and you miss
Yeah.
5 minutes of the
Yeah.
movie, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a different experience. So I don't have anything negative to say about streaming. I
No.
always
No.
think it's I like people having options. If they
Hmm.
choose to stay home, then that's great. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know some people are more hardcore and they go, we
Yeah.
we really need to only have these in the theater, and then
Hmm.
you know, a month and a half later they can put it on streaming. But if I don't know really what the answer is.
Yes.
I love
Yes.
theaters, and I
Yeah.
think we shouldn't. Obviously, we don't want them to go away. So I don't know if there's a good good
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
streaming has really come a long way, and I think people have just gotten used to movies being on streaming, unless it's Spider-Man or something that's really going to get tons of people in the theater. It's hard for smaller movies to,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yes. I mean, even for large productions. I mean, let's say a film like James Bond or Venom. Venom
Right,
Part Two had many showings in the theater, and films like The Last Duel, Ridley Scott movie,
right.
which Harry composed.
hmm Yeah,
In many countries, many cities, it had like two showings a day.
yeah, and that's a big, huge, epic thing that should be seen in the theater. If anything is going to be seen in the theater, it seems
Yeah.
like that.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you're right. But it's not a superhero thing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's just
No.
the way the audience has kind of dictated.
Yes.
I think anyway. I guess studios dictate to a certain amount, but those are the things that bring the people in.
Of course, there's always a pro and a con to
Mm-hmm.
everything, I suppose.
Right.
And Steve, I would like to just go over the action material again, because of course you are experienced in terms of action. Of course, you've done Transformers, and of course also the Island, which is also
Right.
action oriented, or D War, for instance.
Mm.
Do you think that kind of comes easy to you, quote unquote, as you have been able to work on many projects of that kind, or do you try
Right.
to, let's say, revisit some older material which you wrote in order to not go over some old grounds? How does that usually
Right.
happen?
I try to let it happen organically. Usually, for every film, you have your orchestra. If it's unless it's a purely electronic film, which I've done some of, but usually there's the orchestra, and then what are all the other sounds
Mhm.
that go along with the orchestra? People who hire me tend to have heard my scores where I do orchestra and electronic stuff, and they like
Mhm.
that and they want that. And I always try not to go open those old folders
Yeah.
to look at those sounds, because so many of them just you go, oh yeah, that's from that scene in whatever Transformers, and
Hmm.
that's that weird synthy. So I can't use that. So I try to come up with something new, or new sounds, just new ways of doing the. A lot of the directors love pulses.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, and they
Hmm.
just feel like it adds something subliminal to their scene's energy. So you go, okay, how can I do that for the 800th time without using the same? So I use that as an excuse to buy new equipment. And go, hey, that looks cool. Maybe I can make a slightly different pulsing sound that no one will notice is different but me, but at least it's new. And but yeah, you're right. It is a challenge, I guess, trying to
Hmm.
find new ways to do it. But typically, one of the fun parts of doing this job is a film. I look at a film and it kind of gets wheels turning as far as sonically what might work. And ooh, maybe this synth that I haven't used in a while,
Hmm.
I dig that up, and I just kind of let it happen organically. But yeah, I do
Right.
try not to go backwards.
Yes, of course. I mean,
Sometimes there's a sound that I go, oh, that's going to work perfect here, and nobody will know, so I'll steal it and throw it in. But for the most
yeah,
part, I try not to do that.
yeah, great. It's impossible to really remember what you did 10 years
Yeah.
ago, 15 years ago. There is just so much going on. Of course, the fans that listen to many of the albums incessantly or they watch the films a thousand
Right.
times, they kind of remember that. But of course,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of go from project to project, and it's of course
Right.
a stressful job. You are more likely to really forget what you did on, let's
Oh
say,
yeah.
Steamboy
Mm-hmm.
or Live from Baghdad. So, which of course was
Right.
almost 20 years ago. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah, for sure. I forget what I did on 2 years ago, not even 20 years ago. But yeah, no, you're totally right. That's I guess a good thing. And my studio, while it's stayed roughly the same, it does evolve, and it forces us to change certain things and change certain sounds,
hmm
which I think is good. But so you try to hopefully not sound. Yeah, some of the sounds I've used, some of those older films just sound kind of old to me now, so I wouldn't go there anyway.
I think we did talk about Steamboy also a few years ago, and I think many people would consider it to be one of your best compositions or best albums. And I think it can be hard to really evaluate your own work. But how would you rank Red Notice? I mean, personally, I would say, and it's just me, I would say it's in your top five scores.
Oh, thanks. Oh man, I have no idea. I wouldn't know where to put it. I had fun doing it, and I think I did some stuff I had not had the chance to do
Yes.
before that. Uh, but yeah, I wouldn't even know
Yeah.
where to start. But thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it does have a great quality. I mean, many orchestral cues, big action cues, and I'm not talking about just the same kind of rhythmic,
All right.
pulse pounding cue or a drone. It does have themes, or especially the Red Notice theme, which I mentioned.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's very catchy and something people can actually remember, hum, and also whistle. And I think that has kind of vanished in today's cinema versus
Mm-hmm.
20, 30 years ago. I know there are many filmmakers who prefer the kind of, let's say, new approach versus the old school approach.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I know many people would say, or composers would say, that directors think having a thematic approach dates their film for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. So I think it can be very hard to really convince somebody to go for a thematic approach and an orchestral approach,
Right.
or do something hybrid.
Yeah. I've had directors say that, literally use the word that sounds old fashioned, or I don't want that old fashioned approach. Uh, no one, not Rawson, or no
Hmm.
one I've worked with recently, but that doesn't. Only actually once, but just it came to me because you said the word old fashioned, and
Hmm.
that is how a lot of directors look at it. Rawson did say, you know,
Yeah.
I said first to him, I think this is pretty much exactly what you just said. I don't, a lot of films like this might just kind of be percussive, really, and
Yeah.
rely on that. But I think we could sneak some themes in a lot of these spots. That, as far as I'm reading in the script, I think it would work. And he's like, totally. And I specifically said, like I can see Ryan Reynolds giving a look or something, and we play his little theme, and that like be that specific with it.
Hmm.
He's like, yeah, 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 yeah. He was really interested in it because he's huge John Williams fan. He's a huge fan of film scores.
Hmm.
Rawson is. Um, I I'm fortunate to know John a little bit and his agent, and I asked John if he would autograph to Rawson a Raiders of the Lost Ark score sheet, which he did, and
Okay.
Rawson nearly fainted because that's one of the one of his inspirations for this film for
Yeah.
Red Notice was Raiders of the Lost Ark, the
Yeah.
film, and other films, but that was one big one. But anyway, so that I knew from the beginning that Rawson
Yeah.
wanted that approach. And a lot of the films I've done, they wanted more mood, which is fine. I have fun with that too. And I try to sneak theme in a different way, I guess, more motif, I guess. But
Yeah.
and a lot of films move, at least from I've thought about this question because it comes up. And a lot of films, I feel like they move a little quicker today. The editing maybe is a little quicker.
It is.
And there's not the big stretches with a lot of some filmmakers you have it, but not, I feel like a lot of the thematic moments are like truncated. And I find that myself, how do I get this theme in when I only have 7 seconds?
Yeah.
I'd love to have 70 seconds and I could play it long and, lush and all this, but you just have to kind of sneak it in and then you're off to some other shot of, crazy stuff happening. But I guess that's one reason maybe why, I'm not entirely sure why it's gone away. Honestly, I guess if things evolve like this, it'll probably come back at some point. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. There is basically very little, if any, stagnation in the film industry, so it keeps changing and evolving constantly. Right. And there are new sounds created, a new approach, and so it's interesting to see where things might be going. Let's say 5 years from now. But Steve, in terms of your own work, how do you, depending on the picture, like to work? Do you kind of try to avoid really pushing yourself to the limit, or do you try to at times stay relaxed and say, well, let's just try this and see where it takes us?
Right. I think it's all of the above. Like, I wish I try to stay relaxed, but it's hard to, when I'm working on a theme, I always think it's not, this is going to sound like I'm such a perfectionist. That's not about that. I just feel like I'm never sure about what I'm doing. I never have written something and go, oh, that's it. That's perfect. I go, yeah, that's, if I'm allowing a director to hear it, or anyone, if I'm allowing someone other than myself to hear it, that means I think it's maybe okay. But, and years later, I can go back and listen and go, oh, that was pretty good. I guess but in the middle of the process, I find it pretty torturous.
Yes.
Honestly, like just, it could be like 5 notes of a section. I go, I can't find the right order for these notes, or should I start completely over? Is the whole thing is not working, or is it just this bit? And you relax is a good thing you said, because you try to do that, and you not, because I can get obsessed with this one section. That's usually not a good place to be. So if I have the time, I'll put it away and maybe come back a couple days later, and that usually helps. You can go, oh, that actually it's okay, but not that part is or the whole thing is just, I need to start from scratch.
Yes.
Sometimes I'll want to start over, and the filmmaker will go, no, what are you doing? I like that.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, okay, and they'll bring me back from the edge. And
yes, I think many people have described it as a worst case scenario to have to go back to the drawing board. And let's say if you have written 50 minutes of music and all of a sudden somebody says, well, I basically like it, but I think we just need to toss it out anyway because person XYZ has decided it may be a better idea to take a different approach. So I think that can be pretty stifling.
Oh my God, that's horrible. I'm fortunate that I haven't had that of an extreme situation where it's just all got thrown out. That I've heard of, that happening, and that's for sure not really fair to let it get that far in and then go, maybe not. I don't think that's fair to the composer, but who knows, the circumstance may have been something that was unavoidable, but
yes. There may be a scenario in which you wrote, let's say, 5 themes, the director liked it, and then he says, well, no, just write 5 new ones, or vice versa when they say, I don't like it too much, maybe just try it again. And then
Hmm.
a week later, they may approach you again and say, well, what you showed me then is actually
Right.
very good, so let's use it. And
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's happened for sure. And again, I always understand that it's a process for a director. Sometimes maybe I'll be feel frustration, but I never go, oh, well, I told you that was working or whatever. I know from a, just if you think about what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, but that's for sure happened a lot where something will go in and they'll go no, and then it'll come back at the end. They'll go, oh, what was that? Sometimes, occasionally they'll go, what's that?
Hmm.
Like they forgot what the track was. And you go, oh yeah, we wrote that like 2 months ago. He's, oh, can we try that over here? And you go, yeah, great. It's kind of a little bit of a good feeling. And you go, okay, so that wasn't terrible. But again, it's all part of the process for them, just trying to accept this music as a part of their film. And I know that's, it's different for everyone, but it seems universal that it takes time for them to get used to it. They need to hear it a lot and then decide, you know, if
Yeah.
do they really like it.
If we still have a couple of minutes left, or
Hmm.
okay,
Yeah.
you said you could go on about Harry probably
Oh yeah, yeah. Right.
forever. I mean, he's a fantastic composer and also very experienced. Do you have a favorite moment, or let's say or favorite moment project wise, or something that really stood out where you said,
Right.
"Well, Harry, he's a great leader. He taught me a lot. He taught me
Right.
this and that."
That's a good question. He he's another big personality, very kind and very funny. I don't know how well you know Harry, but he's
Yeah,
just a great guy. You've spoken to him a few times.
yeah. I mean,
Right.
we have done many interviews, and when I was at
Right.
Abbey Road when he recorded Disney Nature's Penguins, great
Right.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he is great. I just ran into him a few weeks ago, just before the holidays, at a store in Santa Monica. We both live in Santa Monica, but he was always such a hard worker. Because when I met him, he was working on a Hans movie actually, and because I was crazy and was so in love with Hans's place and didn't
Mhm.
want to leave at night,
Mhm.
he would come in at night and work in Hans's studio while Hans was home asleep, so that the studio was, going 24 hours. And he let me sit in, and I think he was working on The Fan, the Tony Scott film.
96, right? 1996, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Hmm.
He was just very focused. He wouldn't go, "Hey, Steve, look, I'm going to do this now." But I was watching him, and he let me watch him, and I just saw the little things, like how he made it sound, how he got it sound really big and ballsy in this one section, or how he made it just tiny little things that I was
Hmm.
witnessing him do. And then at one point, he was looking for an assistant because he started getting his own films, and he mentioned my name. I didn't even throw my name out there. He just said, "What about Steve? He's around and he seems like a hard worker." So, that's another moment where, it could have, if that didn't happen, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today. So, and then he would let me use his studio
Hmm.
when he was not there. So he'd go home. I was never sleeping at this point. So I started just messing around with scenes of his movies, and he saw that, and he would give me great feedback and said, "Hey, do you want to actually try to score a scene?" It
Hmm.
started very organically. I wasn't
Hmm.
like trying to sneak in and squeeze into his films or anything. I was just having fun, and he saw that and gave me a lot of great feedback, orchestration. He's a fantastic programmer, orchestrator, and I think I from Hans and Harry, I learned a ton about how to just make it sound good. Even if I
Yeah.
write a cue and the
Yeah.
cue's terrible, then most directors will go, "Oh, it sounds great. We could probably put this in the film as
Hmm.
is." Even though I always say, "No, we don't want to do that. We want to record the orchestra. Because it's going to sound better with the live orchestra." But I learned that from Harry and Hans, just watching them over the years. And I can't think of I think your question was a specific moment with Harry. I don't.
Hmm.
I can't think of anything specific other than just we had such a good relationship that I felt, I would just watch him, and then at night I would write and he would give me feedback, and I just learned that way, I guess, and sort of absorbed whatever he had to teach, and
Yeah, yeah.
then watching him with the orchestra and watching him with the directors, especially. That's another thing. Watching him interact with
Hmm.
these huge directors and watching Hans interact, you learn a lot of just how to deal with
Yes,
people.
yes, yes, yes.
But yeah, Harry, and thank you, Harry, if you're out there.
Is there anything else you would like to add about Rawson Thurber or about Hans, Harry, about your career or Red Notice? Anything
Uh,
that comes to mind before we wrap up?
no, I feel very grateful that I've had the career I've had and have been able to work with people like everyone you just mentioned.
Hmm.
Rawson, I feel, you know, to be introduced to someone like that, who's such a great storyteller, and he writes a lot of his own scripts.
Hmm.
To be introduced to him, and then now to possibly be doing a third film with him already, that's it's very rewarding
Yes.
that when something like that happens, because he really knows what he wants. He's not just like, oh yeah, that's great, music, that's fine. He's really, I'm trying not to say he's difficult, because he's not difficult, but any good director is not going to be easy to please. And it was a challenge to find Red Notice, but it was rewarding because I think we finally found something that he was happy with. And ultimately, that's what, if the director's happy, then I'm happy.
Yeah.
Even though I usually think, I probably could have been a little better, but yeah, I feel fortunate to work with people, like with all the people I've worked with, and I'm working on a film now that with people that I have never worked with. So that's always a great, again, I appreciate the opportunities given to me from people who don't know me really. They may have heard some things I've done, but to go, yeah, let's give Steve a shot on this, even though we've never worked with him.
Do you mean
You know,
League of Super Pets or
yes, right.
oh.
So finally, another animated film after all these years.
Steve, thank you very much for taking so
Thank
much
you.
time out of your
Oh, please.
schedule. I really appreciate that. I had such a great time talking to you again, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I always do. Thanks, Michael.
Great. And thanks again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and let's talk soon.
For sure. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.
You too.